Gundam Breaker 2. I'm more of a Gundam lover than a Gundam breaker. Well, except for the Endless Waltz designs and the Unicorn and the Barbatos. I'll break those all day. This is an incredible Gundam game. It ate up so much of my attention when I first played it. Like, literally, for 2 months, this was all I was playing. And it was the only thing I wanted to think about. And the funny thing is, conceptually, it's such an obvious idea. It's surprising it took as long as it did to make the original Gundam Breaker. It's just really, really cool, and I think anyone who loves Gundams needs to give this game, or at least its series, barring one exception, a try. Now this is a Gundam game, except not really. We might be arguing semantics here, but this is actually not a game about Gundams. Rather, it's a game about Gunpla. Now, if you're not familiar, don't worry, it's not that important. But Gunpla is one of those weird Japanese portmanteaus they like so much that is a combination of Gundam and Plamo, which is in and of itself one of those weird Japanese portmanteaus they like between plastic and model. Basically, instead of running around as Gundams, you are running around as their buildable model kit line in this game. And they want to adhere to that in the most truest sense, which, yes, means this game is basically a giant ad, which actually has giant ads for the literal model kits that were coming out at the time, as well as lovingly 3D rendered every single box of every single Gunpla kit you can play in this game, in-game, although some of them don't line up properly because in like the master grade line you still find high grades because there weren't master grades for that thing. It's a small thing, but if you ever had an interest in the Gundam model kits, this game is basically a giant advertisement and a love letter to them. But if you're not familiar with the Gundam model kits, the fact that they want to adhere to that very fact opens up one very big, one very important gameplay mechanic that feels really incredibly obvious and really should have been here pretty much from the original Gundam game, all the way back in like the 80s. See, the beauty of Gunpla is that aside from the fact that it attracts dust like no other when you live in a basement like I do and it's never gonna get dusted, they're designed pretty much entirely modularly. For the most part. I mean, if you're building IBO kits, they swap the inner frame on some of those, so no, you can't combine early Barbatos stuff with later Barbatos stuff. The point is that, by and large, you can take all the bits from one Gunpla and slap it into another, provided they're like the same size and grade, and you can make your own custom thing. And that's a big deal. Like, sure, you could just buy your favorite kit and make a model of what your favorite thing is, and maybe even pose it in like an iconic pose or something to recreate your favorite scenes from the show. But much more importantly for this game, you can take all the bits off one and slap it into another and make your own completely custom thing that is entirely you. If you have a specific head or body or backpack or arms or legs or weapons or skill sets, you can apply that to your own personal Gundam. A couple years ago, I played a demo to Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, and I likened it a lot to this game because I see a lot of that game in this game, and that made me love that game. So, you know, if you like Xenoverse and you've never tried a Gundam game, maybe check this one out because it kind of has some overlap. But the key here is doing things your way and making things your style, and ultimately creating your best personal Gundam. Now, it doesn't have everything because, of course, so much has come out since this game, but it's pretty accurate towards the time up to IBO. It doesn't include IBO stuff, which is why they marketed IBO so heavily with the third game and every other game after that. Namco Bandai really likes to market the Barbatos for some reason. I'll never understand why. Maybe it's just me. I've always seen that as a huge flavor of the month style Gundam with a really unimpressive pilot. Like, that was the point as to why he had to plug his brain into his suit. He couldn't do it otherwise. He was really not that good. I don't know. Maybe I'm just anti all the things that people liked about IBO. I don't know. Needed more Grimgird is the short version of this story. Or maybe we just need more pilots that were really, really cool, like Duo and the nameless, faceless Stark Jagan pilot from Unicorn. Those guys were awesome. The plot to this game, that it takes place in the far-flung future of the mighty, mysterious year of 2024. You are a contestant in Gunpla Fest, a festival for Gunpla, where you get to show off your awesome Gunpla by injecting it into a virtual reality world and operating inside this self-contained Gundam metaverse that kind of clashes all the different Gundam universes inside. Starting off, you get to team up with a Wing Gundam and an Exia to protect the Archangel, to give you an idea of what that's about. And if you're not into Gundam, it's 3 different universes going at it, so you know. But the neat thing is, after a while, you kind of separate yourself from your team and you meet some new people, and then you go back and you find that your team has sort of evolved their suits. And your new friends have evolved their suits over time. And let me just tell you, the plot to this game is anime AF. Like, seriously, this game has some incredibly anime moments. It's ridiculous and very, very cool if you're into that sort of thing. I definitely saw some of this and was like, oh man, that's cool. There's some big explosions and fancy moves and fancy, flashy bits of story in this game. So even if you don't understand what's going on, it's still worth paying attention to because it is very entertaining, if nothing else. The gameplay to Gundam Breaker 2, when broken down into its simplest form, is more or less a hack and slash beat 'em up. The key premise is going through 2 or 3 areas per stage, defeating all the enemies, and then when you get to the final area, you encounter effectively a boss, which hits a little bit harder and has some fancier weapons, ostensibly. However, the game adds a lot to this premise. It's not simply a matter of hacking and slashing everything in your path, although that is the base mechanics in terms of gameplay. There is a lot of nuance here. For one thing, the game likes to mix up sub-objectives as you play through the game. So while you might be hacking and slashing your way through a level, well, suddenly some vehicles might pop up and you can ride them, and while they don't control all that great, you can do a lot of damage with them. Likewise, towers might show up to impede your progress, ones that will shrink you except for your head, which leaves you with a tiny Gundam with a giant head, and ultimately you'll do very little damage until you take out those towers, or ones that dampen your damage entirely until you destroy the towers. It's pretty interesting to see that they like to sidetrack your progress in hacking and slashing, all while keeping a relatively stable flow. It feels like all this stuff isn't really an interruption so much as it is just a very nice sort of side trip during your main quest of hacking and slashing your way through every single area. And not every area is simply get from point A to point B and kill everything in your path, because there are multiple different level styles. There are defensive missions which require you to mow down waves and waves of enemies while defending your own territory. There's sort of like versus deathmatch stages where you have to destroy your opponents and their home base before they destroy yours. There's effectively stock matches where you have to reduce your enemy opponent's ranks before your team gets reduced to nothing, as well as, of course, your standard hacky slashy getting from point A to point B nonsense. And that's not even the end of it, because on top of all of that, I still haven't talked about ace units. Because ace units are effectively an interesting way to increase replayability in this game. Basically, as you play through each stage, you get a rank, and that rank gives you different drops, different parts, and different materials, which are all very useful. However, if you do exceptionally well, an ace unit will show up, and these are effectively bigger, stronger boss units that get their own intro cinematic, as well as typically a theme song that references the series they're from, which is really quite cool. Even if it doesn't make an awful lot of sense that the Gundam Age 1 is using the Gundam Age 2's theme song, I'm getting a little bit too in-depth on that. But it's really cool to run into these things, and it leads to another one of Gundam Breaker's biggest, most interesting strengths in terms of mechanics, which is these ace units are ultimately a giant reward. You have to do very, very well to make them appear, and they're a challenge when they show up. But when you beat them, you get the ultimate reward, because I haven't mentioned this yet, but Gundam Breaker as a series is sort of like the Gundam equivalent of Monster Hunter, in the sense that you cut your opponent down, and then you proceed to wear it as a hat. Effectively, every mobile suit that you cut down has a chance of dropping materials, which is, again, very useful, or parts that allow you to further customize your mobile suit. Now, if you don't want to wait around for drops and you happen to be very, very rich, like all the people who own master grades that I'm very jealous of, well, you can just go buy the kits. And it's cool that these kits are lovingly rendered in 3D, even if some of them don't make a lot of sense because there's not a Master Grade Gundam X divider, although there is a Gundam X Master Grade that I've wanted forever, and I can sit here and drool over the box art all the same. But that said, you buy these parts or you acquire them through drops, And then you get to go to what is possibly the coolest part about this game, which is the customization center. Now this is where one of the bigger issues of the game comes up, because while some of the menus in this custom area are entirely in English, or at least have an English subtitle so you know what's going on, pretty much none of the stats do. And if you're someone who's playing based on how good stuff is stat-wise, you're going to be confused. Even me, who's played a metric crap ton of this game, having to come back after a little bit not playing it, I don't know what any of these do, and it's a little obnoxious, but I'm sure there are guides online. And the fact is, even if you just build a mobile suit based on the parts of your favorites, you'll probably make something that at least works. But what's more important, other than just making a functional mobile suit, is making one that's wholly your own, and one that's ultimately very expressive of who you are, and that is very, very cool. I mean, take a look at this. I freaking made Samus in this. And bear in mind, this wasn't something that took a lot of planning or a lot of effort or anything. This was something I slapped together in about 10 minutes, based on parts I had lying around in my inventory. Like, if you put in the time and effort and you have a lot of creativity, you can do some incredibly cool stuff with this, visually. Basically, anything you would want to make your own perfect Gundam is here. The whole Magellan. But of course, in its most base form, you pick your favorite parts from the Gundams you like those chicken feather Wing Zero custom wings everyone goes crazy for that I still don't really understand. I've never understood those Endless Waltz designs, but that's on me. That said, you can build the Endless Waltz designs, but they have the TV wing here too, which is huge points for me. Now that said, the pull of mobile suits, while very impressive, isn't 100% extensive. Obviously, they're not going to include suits that were designed after this game, but of course, you know, just going back to my base choice of pulling wing kits out, well, there's not a ton of them, and you don't really get too many of the base TV suits, just the base Wing Gundam off the top of my head. And while this is me absolutely cherry picking just because it's the top of my head, it does show a greater issue of them not being 100% extensive with the entire Gunpla library. That said, they do have a lot of the more obscure suits, including a lot of the stuff that was designed basically as a model with nothing based on it, the MSV Mobile Suit Variation line. You can see a lot of stuff like that in here. And I mean, if you're a fan of Seed, don't worry, all like 1800 versions of the Strike are here, including the Build Strike, which was new at the time. If you like Gundams, and you have a favorite, you're gonna find it here. And I think if you're into the model kits, this is not even including the game that this is a valuable tool to you, because it is an excellent simulation for kit bashing. If you've ever wanted to make your own custom Gundam and just wanted to see what some parts would look like put together, or with certain color schemes or paint jobs or patterns, you can put all of that together in relatively accurate facsimile here. You can add your own decals if you want, although I will say that you don't have a ton of control over that. I think you can put like 2 custom decals on, but you can't like pick too much into the specifics of where or what size or color. And you can turn on like basic warning stuff, like, you know, don't put your head near the thrusters or your face will get nuked off, but they're nice little bits of detail. And you can put on various different weathering patterns, camouflage patterns, as well as, of course, whether or not you want it to be a metallic shiny or a matte finish. A lot of people seem to go for matte. I tend to prefer the metallic shiny myself, but you do you, buddy. Either way, if you like Gundam or Gunpla, or you've ever had that one dream mobile suit in your head, Gundam Breaker might just finally let you realize it. And that's cool. And on top of that, you have a damn good hack and slash beat 'em up with a great sense of progression, always building up things. And your parts, no matter how weak they are, can always be built up because there's a leveling system associated with them. It's just a matter of getting materials and upgrading what you have already. Which is great, because that means even if you're getting parts you don't need or don't want, you know, you're still getting the materials associated with them, so you can upgrade the stuff you do have that you do want. Upgrading the kit no matter what you're doing. And that's fantastic. That means there's always a sense of progression. Always getting stronger and always building bigger and better. That's important. That means that no amount of time feels wasted. That is huge. Now there is a little bit of a stumbling block here, and that is that this game likes to, inaccurateness to the actual model kits, come in multiple grades. If you're not familiar with model kit grades, don't worry about it. Basically, high grades exist as cheap, smaller alternatives. Master grades are bigger, have more details, but are more expensive, and I can't afford them, and I'm jealous of the people who can. Now, Halfway through the game, you start running into master grades, and you're gonna feel a little bit underpowered, but eventually you get those drops and you get a slightly bigger Gundam and things work out. It's a little bit of a hurdle, but it doesn't seem like it was all that much. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't completely restart, I just went with the file I had, which already had a master grade, but when I made Samus here, it was like 50-50 parts from the higher tier suit and the lower tier suit, and it was a lot harder, but it still worked pretty well, and I could still take things well above my weight class, so I don't think it would be all that hard, but there's a little bit more strategy involved. Also, if it looks like I'm completely running through this game with no issue whatsoever, that's because I've actually, like, seriously poured an insane amount of time into the Gundam that I started with. I love my custom Gundam, thank you, and I hope it shows, but I'm hoping it doesn't make this game look like a total cakewalk because there is some serious challenge here. Likewise, you can equip your custom Gundam with custom passive abilities and equipment. If you want your Gundam to char kick things, you can. If you want to equip the Zero system, go nuts. You can also equip side equipment like healing items, nets to trap opponents, hand grenades and stuff like the Zaku's typically equipped. Again, basically just side equipment from any sort of Gundam you could imagine. It's here, and that's fantastic. And once you combine that with your custom backpack, shield, gun, sword combo, arms, legs, body, paint job, head, weathering, and all that good stuff, you have an amazing Gundam that is going to be entirely your own. Even if you just picked something that is entirely stock, it's always going to have your own personal stamp on it, whether you realize it or not. This game is amazing for customization. And when you combine that with the excellent hack and slash nature of this game, it's pretty awesome. Now that said, there are a few issues. First and foremost, like I said, the menus are a little bit awkward. It does take a little bit of time to figure out how they work, and stats, you're basically going to need a guide to figure out. The basic controls are a little bit obtuse. Just starting a level requires you to hold down the start button for like 3 seconds after you've selected a mission, which the first time I played this, I was completely stumped on. And once you actually get into a fight, like every button on the controller, plus every button combined with L1, plus every button combined with R1 is used, it has an overly complicated control scheme for a ostensibly fairly basic hack and slash. As well, while I like to credit this game for being very accurate to the suits that you're using, such as, again, using the Wing Zero and getting the Zero system, while that does happen, there are some omissions, and there can be fairly big omissions depending on how much of a purist you are in the series. For example, and I understand the reason for this, but this is the big example, if you had pretty much any suit from Zeta Gundam, one of the best Gundam series out there, by the way, go watch Zeta Gundam. Zeta Gundam was quite famous for being very, very heavy on the transforming mobile suits. The vast majority of Zeta suits transform. Now, because this is a game about modular design, you can't really do that. So unfortunately, every suit out there that has a transformation out there, they don't get it. So all you Zeta fans, you get to experience the horror of having your magical suit stripped of its transformation ability. Fortunately, you don't have to experience it getting covered in chicken feathers like my beloved Wing Gundam turned into the Wing Zero Custom, but still, it's kind of a bad blow to see one of your signature suits, like signature abilities, kind of stripped from it. But given that it's entirely about modular design, I kind of get why that is, because, you know, if your suit has one piece of Zeta but everything else is non-transformable, how would that work? I get that they had to make a lot of compromises here, but there is another compromise that I think is a bit unforgivable, and I think it's just because of the engine that this game is running on, and the game's basic physics, and that is, there's no flight in this game. And considering that Gundam spends like 60% of its time in space, not having a proper fighting system for space combat is not the best. It feels like this game is desperately calling out for a flight system. Like, yeah, you can jump and you can kind of hover and there's air dashing, but eventually your thrusters do wear out and then you're back on the ground. And unfortunately, there is just not really any proper air combat, which feels a little bit unfortunate. And unfortunately, none of the Gundam Breaker games have ever really gotten away from this, which is a shame. If I had one other issue with this game, I guess it would be grades. Now again, this probably doesn't mean anything to anyone who doesn't really build Gundam model kits, but grades are basically the different sizes and detailed variants of each version of each suit. And while you can get the two lowest grades that are high grades, 1/144 scales, and master grades, 1/100 scales, you can fight perfect grades, which are the huge 1/60th scales, and they're mostly used as bosses in this game. You can't get any parts from them that'll let you build your own, which is a bit of a tease, not gonna lie. Although I will say the giant enemy fights, both the perfect grades and the non-perfect grades, being able to just fight giant monsters like the Dendrobium, as well as multiple big zombs. You know, it's cool that they have sectional damage and that you feel like you're ripping them piece by piece, part by part, and it feels like you're literally playing Monster Hunter but with Gundams. And that's a damn awesome feeling. That said, if you can get past the kind of awkward menus and the somewhat obtuse control scheme, you have an amazing hack and slash with excellent customization, and I think a game that might just get some people into the Gundam model kits as a whole. And not just because it is a incredibly blatant advertisement, but just because it's interesting to try and customize your own Gundam. And it's like Lego. As someone who spends most of his life in the digital realm, so to speak, being able to just unplug and build something with your hands is rewarding. And when it's a giant killer robot that you can imagine yourself piloting, it's cool. And when you can make your own custom one, even more so. You know, Gundam Breaker is, at its core, a very obvious idea. Make your own custom Gundam and then go nuts with it. I think it handles it excellently. The overall presentation to Gundam Breaker is awesome. It looks great, and like I said, there's tons of customization to make it look how you want and make your Gundam look how it should look, as you think. As well, the game itself looks pretty solid for its time, which is good. The soundtrack is tremendous. It has tons of original soundtracks, as well as the classic ones, typically reserved for ace units. I know when I activate Breaker mode combined with the Zero system, I get to hear a lot of Hero's theme, at which point I immediately just have to start rocking out. No joke, I've got like an hour of it on loop on my computer right now. The rendition in Gundam Breaker is just excellent. But all the classic Gundam songs are here, as well as the iconic ones, as well as a bunch of new songs that just work excellently. Now, if you want a copy of Gundam Breaker 2, I don't think you're going to have to pay as much as I did. PS3 imports tend to be like right on that bubble of where importing gets kind of expensive because modern importing for some reason gets really expensive. But if you want a copy right now, it is $25, which is a steal. Back when I had to buy this, which was a couple of years ago, it was like $100. And for $25, this is a no-brainer must-have. I would say this is quite possibly the best import for the PS3 I've ever played, and next to the excellent Gundam vs. Zeta Gundam, this could quite possibly be my favorite of all time in terms of Gundam games. And I mean, all it took was the obvious idea of letting you make your own Gundam. The fact is, at the end of the day, a very famous fictional Gundam character based on a very real, famous Gundam model kit builder once said that Gunpla is freedom. The idea that Gunpla is what allows you to express yourself in Gundam form. It allows you to explore your favorite intricacies and moments in all of Gundam, your personal quirks in Gundam, your just very whims in the form of little plastic models. And I think Gundam Breaker is an expansion of that. It's a video game that allows you to understand your very core interests through the medium of Gunpla. It allows you to express yourself and create your truest self and your truest Gundam in a single disc. For that, I think this game is absolutely amazing. Now, I know what you're about to say. Well, Fury, I would love to play this, but I'm not going to play a game in Japanese. I don't care if some of the menus are in English. I need a game fully in English. Well, don't worry, because there is a total of exactly one solution to that problem, and I am, of course, talking about... Get the hell out of here, you piece of shit. I'm talking about Gundam Breaker 3 Break Edition. This game was put out in the Asian territories, which means it has a complete English translation. Not dubbed, but it's subtitled, and it has a lot more customization than this game did. But, I don't know, I liked how incredibly anime Gundam Breaker 2's story was. And besides, in Gundam Breaker 2, you could fight in an actual Gundam cafe, and you could hear what it sounds like when a Gundam gets fried by a frying press, because they got a little too close to the hot griddle. And that's pretty special. How many other games let you get to hear the exact Foley work of what it sounds like when a Gundam gets fried by a frying press? Not many. I certainly can't think of any others. This game is really damn special like that, I think. Once again, I would like to finish this off with the words of the Meijin himself. Gunpla is freedom. And Gundam Breaker, well, that's freedom in a video game form.